The moment Lydia handed me a gift, I knew something had changed. But it wasn't the gesture that hit me. It was the hollow smile behind it. After all the years of giving, of being invisible in my own family, I wasn't about to stay silent anymore. This wasn't a gift. It was a reminder. And this time, I would take control of what was mine. I'm curious, where in the world are you joining us from? Drop your city or country in the comments and make sure you're subscribed for all the latest updates. It was supposed to be a day of family warmth, but when Lydia told me to stay out of her family photos, something inside me snapped. The scent of cinnamon and cloves clung to the air, curling around the golden light of Sam and Lydia's perfectly staged living room. Everything sparkled, garlands wrapped tight around the banister, candlelight flickering off crystal glasses, a Norman Rockwell postcard come to life. And then there was me, standing awkwardly near the entryway, clutching a casserole dish that had suddenly gone cold in my hands. Lydia turned slightly, her smile locked into place for the camera. "Helen," she said lightly, not even glancing my way, "would you mind sitting this one out? Just the core family." Her words hit like a flick of ice water behind the knees. I didn't move, didn't speak, just nodded, too quickly, as if I agreed. Of course I didn't belong in their photo. The flash went off. And in that moment, I saw it all too clearly, the distance I'd pretended not to see for years. Sam, my only son, didn't even turn toward me. The toddler in his arms squirmed as he laughed, and Lydia leaned in, her hand resting on his chest like a claim. Her mother beamed beside them, arm draped around Sam like he was hers, not mine. I'd spent all morning perfecting that sweet potato casserole, bourbon glazed, just like my mother used to make for Sam when he was small enough to sit on the counter and sneak pecans when he thought I wasn't looking. But no one asked for seconds. I wasn't even sure anyone had noticed it on the table. I turned slowly and walked into the kitchen, pretending to check on the rolls in the oven. My hands trembled as I leaned on the counter. It wasn't just the photo. It was every little moment that had led to this one. Every holiday dinner where I brought a dish and left with the same untouched container. Every conversation where I was talked over, redirected, or simply ignored. Every time Lydia called her mother Nana in front of me while I was just Helen. I wasn't part of the picture. Not really. Not in their lives. Not in their hearts. I'd spent years excusing it, smoothing it over, telling myself it was just a phase or my imagination. But tonight made it plain. I peeked out again. They were laughing now, passing around presents. Lydia sitting cross-legged on the floor, hair tied in a silk bow, looking like the heroine of some Hallmark movie. My grandson unwrapped a toy truck I hadn't even known he wanted. My name wasn't on a single tag. That tight smile I'd worn for so long began to twitch. I watched Sam lean over and kiss Lydia's temple as she held up the baby. I saw her mother lean back in the armchair, sipping from her wine glass like a queen presiding over her court. And me? I was the help. The polite inconvenience they hadn't figured out how to phase out yet. But they would. I felt it. My breath hitched, but I didn't cry. Not this time. Something inside me was shifting, like a stone that had been sitting too long at the bottom of a river, finally pried loose by the current. There was a stillness inside me that felt dangerous. I straightened my spine, smoothed my blouse, and looked at myself in the oven's reflection. No more swallowing it down, no more playing the ghost in my own family. I wasn't going to be quiet anymore. I've been silent too long. I can't let this go any longer. The road home was empty, a ribbon of black stretching beneath my headlights, flanked by snow-dusted evergreens that blurred like ghosts in the dark. The car heater purred softly, but it couldn't thaw the storm rising inside me. The casserole dish rattled in the seat beside me with every bump, its foil crinkled like a wound that refused to close. I hadn't bothered to take any leftovers. No one had offered. Just the same stiff hugs and airless smiles. I might as well have been a neighbor passing through with a borrowed ladder. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. My hands weren't shaking anymore. As the streetlight slid across the windshield, I thought about all the years I'd spent folding myself smaller, biting my tongue when Lydia made decisions that left me out, pretending not to notice when Sam stopped calling unless he needed something. I had told myself it was part of motherhood, that it was noble to expect nothing. But noble doesn't mean invisible. I remembered every moment I'd stood beside Sam through his life, the late nights during college, wiring him money he never thanked me for, the years I spent helping him build his business, quietly, behind the scenes, taking out loans in my name. I was the scaffolding for his life, the steady hands no one ever saw. And now, I didn't even get to stand in a photo. I turned onto my street, slower now. Christmas lights blinked softly from porches, cheerful lies wrapped in garland and hope. My house sat dark, save for the porch light I'd left on. I pulled into the driveway, parked, and sat for a moment, the engine ticking softly as it cooled. I looked at the house I'd paid off on my own. Every brick and beam had come from work no one saw. Summers managing rental units, winters balancing books for small businesses. I had made a life, a legacy. And somehow, I'd let them act like it didn't matter. The idea hit me like a spark to dry pine. If I died tomorrow, Lydia would get everything. The thought turned my stomach. She would sweep through my house, toss out my photo albums, roll her eyes at my dishes and antique books. She'd keep what was valuable and sell the rest, maybe mutter something about decluttering while my ghost screamed from the walls. She didn't love this home. She didn't love me. She tolerated me for appearances and inheritance. Not anymore. I stepped inside, locked the door behind me, and left the casserole on the counter like a relic. I didn't bother changing, just marched into my study, flipped on the lamp, and pulled open the bottom drawer where I kept the old file folders. My original will was there, neat and proper. Sam, the sole heir, of course. Everything divided equally between him and, by extension, Lydia. I told myself it was fair, that it was the normal thing to do. But fair to whom? I sat down, staring at the pages, the cold legal words that had once felt like comfort. They weren't anymore. They were a permission slip for disrespect, for erasure. I thought of the women who'd raised me. My grandmother, who survived on grit and gumption. My mother, who kept the books for her church and never let anyone talk over her. They would be furious with me for letting myself become background noise. I wasn't going to die someone else's afterthought. My pulse quickened, but not from fear, from clarity. I reached for my phone, scrolled to the contact I hadn't touched in years, and hit the call button. Hi, Peter. Yes, it's Helen. I need to update my will. Tomorrow. This is about reclaiming my worth, not just my money. The next morning, I rose before the sun. The world outside was still and quiet, the way it only is on winter mornings when the frost has claimed every rooftop, every branch. The sky hadn't turned yet, just a deep, uncertain gray. I wrapped myself in my wool robe and stepped into the study, the air cold against my ankles, but my heart steady. I lit a fire in the hearth, not for warmth, really, just to feel something living flicker in the room with me. I carried a cup of black coffee to the desk and sat down, my breath fogging slightly as I pulled out the folders again. Paper thick with years, corners soft from handling. There it was, the inventory of everything I had built, my properties, 2 rental units in good neighborhoods that I'd bought decades ago with grit and low-interest loans, my savings slowly grown from careful budgeting, coupon clipping, and compound interest, and my heirlooms, the quilt my grandmother stitched by hand during the Depression, my mother's gold locket with the chipped garnet, the worn maple dining table with every birthday and hard conversation etched into its surface. These weren't just assets. They were pieces of me. For a long moment, I didn't move. A voice inside me, quieter now but familiar, whispered, "Are you sure?" I thought about Sam's little boy, his chubby hands, that quick, bright laugh. It wasn't his fault, but children learn what they're taught. And Lydia? Lydia had taught him that I was peripheral. And Sam? He had let it happen, time and again. I opened my laptop, the glare of the screen stark in the early morning light, and found the document Peter had sent me overnight, a draft of the new will, clean, direct, and devastating in its simplicity. Sam and Lydia were no longer beneficiaries. Everything would go to a foundation I'd supported for years in quiet donations, one that helped women over 50 rebuild their lives after financial abuse, divorce, or abandonment. It felt fitting. My legacy wouldn't be a reward for neglect. It would be a life raft for womb. And like me, the ones who were always expected to give without asking for anything back. I took a breath, the kind that reaches all the way down into your belly. I read the document again, not like a mother, not like a woman trying to preserve a connection that was only ever one way. I read it like someone reclaiming her own narrative. Would they hate me for it? Probably. Lydia certainly would. Sam, maybe he'd feel betrayed. Maybe he'd even feel hurt, but not as hurt as I had felt year after year, watching myself be erased from my own story. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't spite. It was clarity. I clicked to sign. The cursor blinked on the screen like a heartbeat. I hesitated only once, thinking of Sam as a little boy, barefoot in the grass, chocolate around his mouth, calling me Mama like I was his entire world. But that little boy was gone, and the man he became had forgotten the woman who built that world. My fingers moved slowly, deliberately. I signed. I saved the document, attached it to an email for Peter, and hit send. Just like that, it was done. Lydia was out of my will, and for the first time in years, I felt entirely, gloriously free. I didn't expect this to get so messy so fast. The knock came harder the second time, sharp, impatient. I hadn't even made it to the kitchen for my second cup of coffee. Still in my robe, hair pinned haphazardly, I opened the front door to find Lydia standing there, one gloved hand on her hip, the other gripping her phone like it was a weapon. Behind her, Sam hovered, looking tired, older somehow. His jaw was tight, his eyes unreadable. "You sent it to Peter?" Lydia said, not waiting for an invitation inside. "The lawyer? Our lawyer?" She brushed past me like it was her house, her boots dripping onto my rug. Sam followed silently, setting his coat on the back of a chair without looking at me. I shut the door softly. "Good morning to you, too." Lydia turned. "Don't patronize me, Helen. I saw the new will. How dare you cut Sam out? After everything." "After everything?" I asked, folding my arms. She narrowed her eyes. "You know exactly what I mean. We've included you in every holiday, every family event, and this is how you repay us?" I laughed, quietly, without humor. "You included me the way people include wallpaper. Present, but not part of the story." Sam finally spoke. "Mom, why didn't you talk to me first?" I looked at him. Really looked. His shirt was wrinkled, and there were bags under his eyes. The confident posture he always carried was sagging, unsure, but it didn't make the sting of his silence any easier. "Because every time I brought anything up, you brushed it aside," I said softly. "You always sided with Lydia, always made excuses. I stopped talking because no one was listening." Lydia scoffed. "You're just bitter, because I don't coddle you. You've had a chip on your shoulder since we got married. Don't deny it." I felt the heat rise in my chest, but I kept my voice even. "I gave you my silence for years. I sat at your table, brought gifts for your children, made your dinners, and never once felt like I belonged. That's not bitterness, Lydia. That's grief." Sam shifted. This affects more than just feelings, Mom. This is our future. Do you know what you're doing?" "Yes," I said. "For once, I do." Lydia walked over to the fireplace and leaned on the mantel like she owned the room. "You're punishing Sam because of me. That's what this is. You're trying to control us with money." I didn't rise to the bait. "No," I said. "I'm trying to make sure what I built doesn't end up in the hands of someone who sees me as an obstacle. I'm allowed to choose what matters to me, and it's not being erased quietly while you reap the rewards." Sam looked away. And that's when he said it, barely above a whisper. "My business is failing." The words hung there, naked and brittle. "I took on too much last year," he continued. "Expanded too fast. There's debt. More than you know. The inheritance was going to be the safety net. That's why I sank into the armchair behind me, the fabric cool beneath my hands. "You never told me." He shook his head. "I didn't want to worry you." "Did Lydia know?" She glanced at him, then away. "Of course I did. But we were managing." "No. They were counting. On me." I looked at my son, the man I'd raised, who once clung to my hand in grocery store aisles and now stood before me, too proud to ask, too comfortable to expect. And I felt my heart split in two. Could I really watch him fall? Or was this the price of finally being seen? "I've lost my place in the family, and I'm not sure how to fix it. The silence that followed their visit was louder than anything they'd said. For 3 days, I didn't hear from Sam. Not a word, no calls, no texts. The usual ping of a photo of the kids or a passing, "Hey Mom, just checking in," never came. My phone stayed dark, my house colder than usual despite the humming furnace. I tried to fill the hours, sweeping the kitchen floor that didn't need it, sorting drawers I hadn't touched in years, but no task could quiet the ache in my chest. It wasn't guilt, not exactly. I still believed I'd done the right thing, but the loneliness, the cost, settled in like a slow bruise. I stood at the window, watching snow melt off the gutter and drip in uneven rhythms onto the front steps. It was January now, the decorations long since packed away, the neighborhood stripped bare of its holiday illusions. Everything looked gray, tired. A mirror. Sam wasn't just my son. He was my only family. I'd raised him alone, made every sacrifice so he wouldn't have to grow up wanting. And now he was gone from me in a way I couldn't undo with a phone call or a warm casserole. I tried to tell myself that they needed space, that he was working things out, but the longer the silence stretched, the more it felt like a wall being built. One brick at a time. Lydia had always been strategic. She knew how to twist things into her favor, and I could feel it even without seeing her. She'd be framing me as vengeful, unstable, selfish. I imagined the quiet murmurs, the strategic silences, the way Sam might start to believe that version of me. Not because he hated me, but because it was easier than facing the truth. I found myself talking to the empty house, rehearsing things I wished I'd said, regretting the moments I'd stayed silent when I should have pushed back harder or softer. I wasn't sure anymore. I didn't know which version of me would have saved him, or if any could. Sleep didn't come easily. I'd wake in the middle of the night with my jaw clenched, heart racing. My appetite disappeared. Even my daily walks, the one ritual that had always centered me, felt pointless. The cold air no longer cleared my mind. It only reminded me how small and quiet the world could be without someone waiting for you at the end of it. And then came the doubt. What if I had gone too far? What if taking back my legacy meant tearing down the last bridge between me and the only person I'd ever built anything for? But each time I felt myself slipping into that grief, I thought about the look on Lydia's face, how quickly her concern had turned to control, and how easily Sam had let her speak for him. I missed his voice. I missed him. I didn't need the money. That wasn't the point. It never had been. What I needed was to be seen, to be respected. And now I wasn't sure if I'd traded away the last of that too. That evening, I made a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table with the lights dimmed, my robe still tied tight around me, like armor I hadn't figured out how to take off. I stared at my phone, willing it to light up. And then, just before 9 p.m., it did. Sam. I let it ring once, twice. I answered with a whisper. "Hello?" He didn't waste time. "Mom," he said, "we need to talk. Just you and me. Tomorrow." The emotional weight of this battle is wearing me down, and I don't know how much more I can take. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. Just lay there, beneath the weight of my quilt, staring at the ceiling fan blades unmoving above me. The air was dry, my throat tight, but it wasn't the heat or thirst keeping me awake. It was the anticipation, the dread, and the ache that lived somewhere between my chest and spine now, like something burrowing deeper each day. My eyes burned, not from tears, I'd run out of those, but from exhaustion that refused to settle. My mind wouldn't let me rest. It kept playing out tomorrow's conversation with Sam in 1,000 different ways, none of them ending well. What if he came just to deliver an ultimatum? What if this was the goodbye? I sat up slowly, pressing my palms into the mattress to steady myself. Even that small movement sent a wave of fatigue through me, the kind of tired you can't sleep off. It clung to my bones, crept into my joints. I shuffled to the bathroom and caught sight of myself in the mirror. Gray under the eyes, mouth drawn tight. I looked like a woman in mourning. But what exactly had I lost? That was the question I kept circling around. The inheritance was never the point. It was what it represented. Acknowledgement, ownership, proof that I mattered in this family beyond the casserole dish and polite smiles. But that proof had come at a cost. And I wasn't sure I had the strength to carry it anymore. I poured a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, wrapping both hands around the mug to stop them from shaking. The quiet of the house used to comfort me. Now it just made me feel like I'd been emptied out. Had I gone too far? Had I really put my name back on my life? Or just signed away the last connection I had to my son? A week ago, I would have said I was certain. But certainty had a way of wearing thin in the silence. The longer I sat in it, the more fragile it felt. I thought about all the nights I'd stayed late at bookkeeping jobs, saving every dime for Sam's tuition, the weekends I gave up to repaint apartments, the meals I stretched so he'd never know we were tight. I thought about the way Lydia rolled her eyes when I talked about budgeting, how she treated my practicality like a quaint personality flaw, like I was some relic of a life she'd never had to live. I wasn't fighting her over money. I was fighting her over value. I pushed up from the table, slowly. My knees cracked, and I winced at the dull pain in my lower back. The physical toll was catching up now, as if my body were rebelling against this emotional war. I reached for a bottle of ibuprofen from the drawer and paused. This wasn't just grief. This was depletion. But as I swallowed the pills and stood quietly at the sink, watching a pair of birds pecking at the frost outside, a different kind of clarity began to rise in me, a gentler one, quieter but firmer. I wasn't tired because I had done something wrong. I was tired because I was finally refusing to do what was expected, because I'd spent a lifetime holding everything together, and now I was finally setting it down that maybe I didn't know how much more I could take. But I knew why I had to keep going. This wasn't about the will. It never had been. As the sunlight filtered through the window and landed across the old quilt on my living room chair, the thought came to me sharp and clean. I'm not fighting for money. I'm fighting for me, for the right to matter. I thought I could handle this, but I never expected it to be this brutal. First envelope came 2 days after my talk with Sam. Cream-colored paper, thick, expensive. The return address was a downtown law firm, one I didn't recognize. I knew without opening it that Lydia had gone on the offensive. I sat at my kitchen table, the same place where I used to read bedtime stories aloud, while Sam colored in the margins and slit the envelope open with a paring knife. The words blurred for a moment, not from age or eyesight, but because a wave of disbelief washed over me so fast it made my hands tremble. They were challenging the will. Not just contesting it, dismantling it, claiming undue influence, mental decline, even suggesting that the foundation I'd chosen was a vanity project to spite them. The language was cold, strategic, cruel. Not one word about love, only assets, grievances, and leverage. I pressed my hand to my chest as if I could steady the gallop of my heart through skin and bone. I called Peter immediately. His voice was calm, practiced, but I could hear the quiet frustration beneath it. "They're trying to wear you down," he said. "Push you to settle before court." But it wasn't just the lawsuit. That week, an old neighbor from church didn't wave at me on her morning walk. I noticed how quickly another friend ended our call when I brought up Lydia's name. Then the local paper ran a small piece, buried in the back, but they're all the same. Family rift over inheritance casts shadow on local philanthropy. No names, but enough breadcrumbs to know exactly who'd laid them. I watched myself become a pariah in slow motion. The whispers at the grocery store. The woman who used to sell me eggs from her backyard hens, who now wasn't taking orders. I could feel my life shrinking, becoming smaller than the sum of its parts. Every friendship, every thread of connection, fraying. And still, I refused to bow. I attended every meeting with Peter. I brought receipts, documentation, statements. I was meticulous. Decades of managing other people's books had taught me how to be sharp, how to keep records like they were lifelines. I wasn't about to lose this on a technicality. But inside, the weight was crushing. The quiet was no longer peaceful. It was oppressive. I felt haunted by old memories, by what-ifs, by the version of my son I couldn't seem to reach. Lydia had turned this into war, and Sam had become a soldier on her side, even if he didn't wear the uniform as proudly. One night, I lay on the couch, staring at the dark ceiling. Peter's latest email open on my laptop, outlining their demands: full reversal of the will, a formal apology, and reimbursement for legal costs. I laughed. A sharp, dry sound that came from somewhere I didn't recognize. They didn't want peace. They wanted surrender. But I hadn't come this far to hand my life over in defeat. Not after clawing back my voice. Not after finding the courage to say, I deserve better. Peter called again the next day, voice low but resolute. They're pushing for an expedited hearing. It's official. Date's been set. I didn't flinch. I simply reached for my planner, turned the page, and circled the date with a pen that bled a little too dark. As I hung up the phone, the silence around me deepened, but this time it felt different. Like the calm before a storm I was no longer afraid of. The courtroom was coming, and I would be ready. I can't keep doing this. But how do I let go? We met at the mediation office, a beige, quiet space with soft chairs and even softer voices, as though the building itself was afraid of confrontation. The receptionist offered us all tea, which none of us accepted. I sat on one side of the long oak table, Sam and Lydia on the other, a small, awkward wedge of legal formality between and us. Sam looked worse than the last time I'd seen him. His eyes were tired, his cheeks a shade paler, but there was something else, too, a flicker of shame he couldn't quite hide. Lydia, on the other hand, was crisp and composed, her blouse neatly tucked, makeup fresh. She barely glanced at me as she adjusted her bracelets and crossed her legs. I appreciate you both agreeing to this, I began. My voice came out steady, though my palms were slick with sweat beneath the table. Sam nodded faintly. Lydia didn't move. I don't want to relive every ugly thing we've said, I continued, but this can't keep going. Lydia leaned forward. Then reverse the will. Admit this was never about fairness. It was retaliation. I looked at her. Not harshly, just honestly. It was reclamation. Her mouth twitched, but she said nothing. Sam cleared his throat. Mom, I should have said something sooner. About the business. About Lydia. About everything. He glanced at his wife. You're right. I let things happen. I was tired. I told myself it wasn't that bad, but it was. I made you feel like a stranger in your own family, and I'm sorry. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to grab that apology and hold it to my chest like a balm. But the wounds weren't fresh. They were layered, years deep. One sentence couldn't fill that space. You stood by and watched her erase me, I said. Do you know how many nights I went home from your house and cried in my car before walking inside? You didn't even ask. He dropped his gaze. I didn't know what to say. You didn't need to say anything, I said. You just needed to see me. Lydia folded her arms. This is emotional blackmail. You've turned this whole thing into some performance of victimhood. You think you're punishing me, but you're destroying your son. My fingers curled into the fabric of my skirt. No, I am finally protecting myself. The mediator, silent until now, gently cleared his throat, but I raised a hand. No, I want this said. I turned back to Sam. You may not understand this, but I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm doing it because I need to matter, because I spent 30 years putting your needs before mine, and when it came time for you to stand by me, you didn't. A long silence stretched between us. I don't want things to end like this, Sam finally said, voice quiet, but I don't know how to make it right. That was when it happened, Tom. That small voice inside me, the one that had screamed for respect, for dignity, whispered something new, You can still choose how this ends. I looked at Peter, then back at Sam. I will offer you a portion of the estate, I said slowly, not because I'm giving in, because I'm giving you one last chance. Sam blinked. What? You can have it, I said, but only if you mean what you say. If you come to me as my son, not Lydia's mouthpiece. If you see me as a person again, if you make it right, not with papers or courtrooms, but with truth. He didn't respond. Lydia opened her mouth, but Sam held up his hand. She froze, His eyes found mine again, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't see judgment or resentment. I saw confusion, pain, a man torn between two versions of his life. I don't know if I can, Sam said. I don't know if I can forgive you for this. And in that moment, I wasn't sure if I could forgive him either. I never thought I'd find peace, but now I'm beginning to see it, It started with a message. Not a dramatic phone call or a formal apology, just a quiet text from Sam that read, Can I come by this week, alone? I stared at it for a long time, the words almost humming in my hand. Part of me wanted to delete it, pretend it hadn't arrived. But another part, the one that still knew the cadence of his childhood laughter, replied, Yes, tomorrow morning, When he arrived, he looked smaller somehow. Not physically, but stripped of something, the shield he always wore when Lydia was nearby. He stood on my porch in the same flannel jacket I remembered from years ago, worn thin at the elbows, snowflakes clinging to the hem. I brought coffee, he said. I opened the door wider. I made banana bread. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning, We sat in the sunroom, the only place in the house that still caught full morning light. The air between us was heavy, but no longer hostile. We sipped in silence, the clink of mugs and the occasional creak of the old wicker chairs filling the space. I've been thinking about what you said, Sam finally murmured, eyes fixed on the snow outside. About being seen. I said nothing. I wasn't ready to make it easy. I didn't understand, he continued. I didn't want to, because if I really let myself see how much I'd let you down, he trailed off. I waited. It scared me, he said, because you were the one who was always there. You were the steady one, the strong one. I didn't want to admit I'd stopped showing up for you. Something in me, tightly wound, began to loosen. Lydia, he said slowly, she's not who I thought she'd become. And that's not your fault. I let the silence settle before I spoke. She hurt me. I know. Did she send you here? He shook his head. No, but she regrets a lot. She told me she never expected you to push back. She thought you'd just keep absorbing it all, like you always had. I didn't know what stunned me more, the honesty or the fact that Lydia had admitted regret at all. I'm not saying she knows how to fix it, Sam added quickly, but I think she'd like to try. I studied him, the lines around his mouth, the way his hands fidgeted with the coffee lid. There was no performance left in him, just truth, raw and uncertain. I don't want to erase everything that's happened, I said. I can't pretend it didn't matter, but I don't want to carry it forever either. He nodded. Neither do I. The words didn't dissolve all the hurt, but they softened it, shaved the edges off just enough to breathe again till we moved to the kitchen. I reheated the banana bread, and we stood side by side in that familiar rhythm we'd once known. Him clearing plates, me rinsing the mugs. It wasn't grand, but it was honest Dot later, comma. As he put on his coat, he paused at the doorway. She'd like to come too, sometime, if you're willing. I didn't answer right away. I just looked at the empty plate where the banana bread had been, and I realized I didn't hate the idea. Not anymore. I'll think about it, I said, Dot. And I meant it, Dot. As the door closed behind him and the quiet returned, I felt something unfamiliar stir in my chest, lighter than hope, steadier than relief. Maybe not an ending, but maybe the beginning of something I thought I'd lost forever. Dot, the journey is far from over, but I'm finally at peace with my choices. Dot. The first time I stood in the new community center, I almost cried, but not from sadness, from recognition. The walls were still being painted, the floors half finished, and the furniture mismatched. But the women inside, their energy, their laughter, their scars, they reminded me of myself. Versions of me at 35, 50, even 70. They were caretakers, survivors, women who'd given until there was nothing left and were now clawing their way back into the light. I sat in the corner of the rec room on a folding chair, watching two of them debate over where to place a bulletin board. They were fiery and opinionated and tired in that way. Only women who've carried too much tend to be. I didn't say much that day. I didn't have to. I was already a part of it. My name wasn't on the walls. Not yet. But the foundation check that made this place possible, that was mine. And it was worth more than any title, any family photo, any seat at a holiday table where I was merely tolerated. I had chosen this. Dot, and it felt like home. Dot. Back at my house, things with Sam and Lydia had reached a gentle truce. She'd visited once, nervous, polite, wearing a scarf I recognized from years ago, back when I'd tried too hard to be accepted. We didn't talk about the past. We didn't talk about the will. We just watched the boys play in the yard while I poured lemonade into glasses and wondered if forgiveness might grow slowly, like daffodils pushing through frost. You don't force them. You just wait. And you notice when they appear. Dot. Sam had kept coming. Not every day, not always alone, but enough. Enough that the house didn't echo quite so harshly anymore. Enough that I started leaving the porch light on again. Dot. But I was different now. Cautious, yes, but not bitter. I had built something beyond them. I began meeting with women once a week at the center. Quiet, informal mentoring. No speeches, just shared stories. They'd bring coffee or pie, and I'd bring my ledgers. I showed them how to build a budget, negotiate rent, demand a seat at the table. Sometimes I just listened. Sometimes I told them how I'd once been a ghost in my own family and how I'd clawed my way back into focus, not by yelling, but by choosing myself. Dot. They always leaned in close for that part. You don't need to scream to be heard, I'd say. You just need to stop whispering. One woman cried in my kitchen after our second meeting. She said no one had ever told her she was allowed to take up space, that she could say no and still be loved, that she could say yes to herself and not feel selfish. I held her hand. I told her I hadn't known those things either, not until it was nearly too late. Dot. Every time I left that place, I felt fuller than I had in years. I thought my name might never be printed in history books, but it would live in conversations, in ledgers, in quiet, fierce women who'd stop apologizing for existing. Dot. That comma, I realized, was legacy. Dot. One morning, as I poured my coffee and watched the birds scatter across the frozen lawn, I noticed a large envelope in the mail basket. The return address stopped me cold. Dot. The foundation. I opened it with careful fingers. Inside was a card, handwritten in looping, uneven script. It wasn't formal, just honest. Because of you, I didn't give up. Because of you, I saw myself again. Thank you for saving my life. There was no signature, just that. I held the letter in my lap, the quiet around me thick with meaning, and for the first time since this all began, I let the tears come, warm, silent, and full of peace. Not grief, not rage, just peace. Dot. This is my new beginning. I'm finally free to live for myself. I woke up that morning without the usual weight on my chest. Dot. No looming court dates, No icy silence from Sam, no buried grief waiting behind the kitchen curtain, just morning light, soft and unhurried, spilling through the slats of the blinds and the steady rhythm of my own breath. I pulled on my sweater, the thick navy one with the frayed cuffs, and padded barefoot into the kitchen. The radio murmured low in the background, some old jazz tune I didn't recognize, and I brewed a pot of coffee, not because I needed to, power through anything, but because I wanted to. That was new. Doing things for no one's benefit but my own. Later that day, I returned to the center. They'd painted the walls a warm sunflower yellow, and someone had strung twinkle lights above the windows. A few of the women were already gathered in the corner, sipping tea and going over job applications. I smiled as I walked in, not just politely, but fully, deeply. I belonged here. Not as a guest or a novelty, but as a pillar. Someone who helped build this. "You're early," Denise called out, grinning. I shrugged. I like to watch the room fill up. I taught a workshop that morning, budgeting basics, same as usual. But afterward, we all stayed longer, talking about the things we used to be afraid of saying out loud. One woman said she'd opened her first savings account. Another admitted she was finally leaving the man who'd been controlling her every move. They weren't just learning spreadsheets. They were reclaiming themselves. Dot and I was too Dot. When I returned home that evening, Sam was waiting on the porch. No grand declarations, no tension, just him, sitting on the top step, a paper bag beside him, with 2 takeout containers. "Thai food," he said, "from that place you used to love." I sat down next to him. We didn't talk much as we ate, just shared quiet laughter when he tried to eat with chopsticks and failed miserably, like he always had as a teenager. Eventually, he leaned back and looked out over the yard. "You doing okay?" It wasn't just small talk, it was careful, earnest. I nodded. Better than I've been in a long time. He glanced sideways at me. "I still feel like I don't deserve to be here." "You're here," I said gently. "That's what matters." We weren't who we used to be, but there was something sacred in what we were becoming, something earned, not inherited. That night, I lit a candle in the living room. Not for a guest, not for ambiance, just because I liked the way it flickered against the glass of the picture frames on the mantel. The one of Sam as a boy still stood there, gap-toothed, mid-laugh, wearing a superhero cape I'd sewn from a dish towel. It didn't hurt to look at anymore. Upstairs, I opened the window in my bedroom and let the cold air rush in. It stung a little, but it made me feel alive. I sat on the edge of the bed with my hands curled around a mug of chamomile tea and stared out into the night. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't waiting. The woman who had once needed permission to exist had written herself back into the story on her own terms, quiet, fierce, whole. I looked out across the street, just bare trees, the soft glow of porch lights, and the hush of wind through branches. And for the first time in decades, I felt it in my bones. I was free. Truly, fully free. The greatest legacy I can leave is peace, not control. The spring fundraiser for the center was modest, held in the church basement with borrowed folding chairs and a sheet cake someone's aunt had made. But it was the most beautiful thing I'd seen in years. There were hand-painted signs above the drink table, tables lined with dollar store tablecloths, and music from a Bluetooth speaker that cut out every now and then. But the room pulsed with life. Laughter echoed from the corners. Women who'd once entered that space with their shoulders hunched and eyes lowered were now hugging one another, organizing carpools, swapping job leads. A legacy, I realized, wasn't a plaque or a trust fund. It was this. Denise pulled me aside just before the raffle began. "We're expanding," she said, beaming. "We're partnering with a literacy non-profit. You started something, Helen." I smiled and squeezed her hand. "We did." I stayed until the last streamer came down, until the leftover sandwiches were boxed up and the kids started dozing off in their chairs. As I stepped outside, the cool air wrapped around me. Not harsh, but clean. A kind of benediction. I stood in the quiet of the empty parking lot, tilting my face toward the stars. This was what I had fought for. Not control, not revenge. Impact. Back home. The house greeted me not with silence, but with stillness. Comfortable, earned. I moved through it like someone finally at ease in their skin. In the kitchen, I found a bouquet of tulips on the counter, yellow and white, tied with a ribbon. A small card leaned against the vase. From Sam the boys. Just because. No explanations, no apologies, just a gesture. I touched the petals gently and left the card there, unopened. I didn't need the words. We weren't perfect, but perfection had never been the goal. At our next family dinner, a casual Sunday affair with takeout and paper napkins, I watched Lydia pour juice for the boys without a single sideways glance in my direction. She asked me about the center and listened when I spoke. Really listened. Her eyes didn't dart away. Her fingers didn't drum on the table. When I offered to help clear the dishes, she didn't wave me off and she handed me a plate. That's when I realized I didn't need to orchestrate everything anymore. I didn't have to shape them into a version of family I'd once dreamed of. They were who they were, and I could either hold them at arm's length in punishment or let the edges soften and live in the now. Letting go didn't mean giving up. It meant releasing. After they left that night, I sat by the window, watching the city glow in the distance. The skyline was blurred by spring rain, streetlights casting golden halos across the wet pavement. Somewhere in that blur, women were rebuilding their lives. Children were being kissed goodnight, and families, flawed, tangled, human, were finding their way back to one another. And me. I was finally stepping into the truth I'd fought so long to claim, that legacy wasn't about who you controlled, it was about who you lifted. I no longer needed to prove my worth by holding the pen. I could set it down and know the story would keep going, in voices I had empowered, in lives I had touched, in love I had reclaimed, not forced, not begged for, but received. I stood and opened the window, letting the breeze rush through. Lights blinked far below, and I smiled, not because I was done, but because I was finally ready to stop gripping so tightly. And for the first time, I felt the future, not as a threat, but as a promise. Section. A legacy reborn. This is what I wanted all along. A legacy that will outlive me. I never imagined my name would end up in a program booklet. Not a glossy one either. Just a folded piece of paper printed at the copy shop down the street, with my name listed under Founder in small but elegant font. I stared at it for a moment, touched the ink like it might disappear, then tucked it into my purse. The room was buzzing. Soft jazz from a secondhand speaker, folding chairs arranged in neat circles. Women I'd once met in crisis now running workshops of their own. A few local reporters mingled, cameras slung over shoulders. Denise was darting from one table to the next, clipboard in hand, and 3 of our newer members were organizing books on a donated shelf in the corner. This was no longer just a center, it was a movement. I poured coffee into a paper cup and found a quiet corner, content to watch the room grow around me. These weren't just faces anymore. They were stories I knew, triumphs I'd witnessed, struggles I'd sat beside in silence. Then I saw him. Sam. Not hovering awkwardly near the door or standing with his arms crossed in discomfort, but laughing, warmly, listening. One of the women was showing him how to organize pantry boxes by expiration date, and he was nodding, rolling up his sleeves, asking questions. He wasn't just visiting. He was helping. I blinked, stunned for a beat, and then, slowly, smiled. Lydia wasn't far behind, greeting someone at the registration table, holding a clipboard of her own. She caught my eye across the room and offered a small wave, not stiff, not forced, just kind. I returned it, and in that brief exchange, I saw it, the shift, the softening, the choice to grow. Sam caught sight of me and walked over, dust on his jeans, sweat beading lightly on his brow. "Hope you don't mind," he said, grinning. "They needed extra hands, and I figured I owed you a few." I looked at him. Really looked. The boy I'd raised was still in there, but now layered with something I hadn't seen in years: humility, gratitude, purpose. "I don't mind," I said softly, "not one bit." He stayed the rest of the afternoon, sorting, lifting, even sharing his own story, when one of the newer women asked how he came to be involved. I didn't hear all the words, but I saw the effect. Heads nodding, shoulders relaxing, a man owning his mistakes and choosing to do better. Later, as we closed up for the night, I stood at the front door and looked back. The last of the chairs were stacked, the lights dimmed low. It was quiet now. Sacred. Denise joined me. "We're going to need a second location soon." I nodded, still watching Sam help a woman fold up a banner. "I think I know someone who'll help us build it," I said. At home. The night was cool and clear. I stepped out onto the balcony with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders and the thank you booklet tucked under my arm. The city below glowed in soft amber and silver, streetlights flickering like quiet stars. This was the dream I hadn't dared to name. Not power, not applause. But this quiet assurance that I had lived, not just endured, that I had mattered, and that what I'd created would continue, carried forward not in bitterness, but in generosity. I looked out at the city, its breath rising into the night sky, and felt it deep in my bones, my stow. Already underway. Denise had asked if I wanted to name it after myself, the Helen Foundation. I'd laughed, flattered, but declined. It wasn't about me. It never had been. I suggested the second light instead, a nod to every woman who thought her life had burned out, only to discover that a second flame could still rise from the ashes. It felt right. Sam and Lydia came by once a week now, sometimes for dinner, sometimes just to sit with me on the porch and let the boys chase each other through the grass. There was an ease in the air that hadn't existed before. They didn't try too hard, and I didn't brace for disappointment. We were learning how to exist beside one another without expectation. Lydia had even begun volunteering with one of our parenting support circles. I heard through Denise that she'd been generous with time and empathy, that she didn't talk about me, she just showed up, quietly, consistently. That was enough. Sam, for his part, was growing into a man I hadn't seen in years. Not the boy I'd raised, not the husband he'd become, but something fuller, steadier. He'd stopped asking me if I forgave him. I think he understood now that forgiveness isn't a door you walk through. It's a room you build together over time. We were still laying the bricks. But they were holding. And me? I had never been busier or more content. Between the center, mentoring sessions, and the occasional speaking invite, small town libraries, mostly, with those lovely, scratchy microphones and cookies wrapped in napkins, my days felt purposeful, not overwhelming, just full in the way good bread is, substantial, nourishing, with room for breath. One afternoon, as I was leaving the center, a younger woman stopped me by the door. She'd been in our financial literacy class, quiet, observant. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said, clutching her notebook. "You make me believe that start. Being over isn't just something people say. It's real. You're living proof." I blinked, touched. "Starting over isn't easy," I told her. "But it's not supposed to be. The hardest part isn't the beginning. It's trusting that you deserve what comes after." She nodded, eyes shining. I walked to my car with a lump in my throat and a pride I hadn't known I still had room to carry. Back at home, I opened the windows and let the spring breeze move through the house. It smelled of cut grass and blooming things. I turned on the radio, classical, soft, and stood barefoot in the living room, letting the music fill the space. The same space that had once echoed with my loneliness now felt like a sanctuary. I was no longer waiting for anyone to return my calls, include me in photos, or hand me permission to matter. I had written my own invitation. I sat at my writing desk as the sun dipped below the rooftops and pulled out a fresh page in my journal. Not to reflect, but to plan. For the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel like a question. It felt like a door. And I was already reaching for the handle. This is the life I fought for. And it's mine to embrace. The morning of the center's second anniversary dawned clear and bright, the kind of day that almost dares you to doubt the goodness of things. I wore a simple navy dress and a soft scarf Sam had given me for Christmas, stitched with tiny embroidered wildflowers that reminded me of the meadow behind my grandmother's house. It felt right, like a full-circle blessing. We didn't make a big fuss. Just an open house, coffee, pastries, a photo wall where women could pin up Polaroids of themselves smiling, small moments of joy, survival, new beginnings. The rooms filled quickly, familiar faces, new ones. A young woman I'd met only once hugged me like we were old friends. A grandmother I'd helped with a rental dispute brought a tray of lemon bars wrapped in wax paper. The entire place hummed with energy, resilience, and the kind of joy that can't be rehearsed. Sam arrived mid-morning, rolling up his sleeves and helping set out chairs without being asked. Lydia came later, gently guiding one of their boys through a crowd of women who offered snacks and encouragement in equal measure. She wasn't polished or perfect. She still had moments of awkwardness around the edges. But she was there. Present, real. At one point, I caught Sam standing near the back, watching me as I spoke to a small circle of women. When our eyes met, he didn't look away. He nodded, not as a child to a parent, but as one adult to another. Equal, grateful. I smiled. Afterward, I stepped out onto the small back porch of the center, needing a moment alone. The sun warmed my shoulders. In the distance, kids played in the alley, their laughter climbing the fence like vines. I thought of who I'd been not so long ago, a woman trying to hold together a family that didn't see her, stretching herself thin for approval she never quite received. And now I was someone who had learned to give to herself first, so she could give to others without disappearing in the process. A soft knock on the frame behind me. Lydia, she held out a small wrapped package, just a little something, from the three of us. Inside was a hand-bound notebook, its cover stitched with golden thread. On the first page, for the woman who taught us that silence is not strength, voice is. I didn't cry. I just nodded, closed the book, and placed it gently in my lap. When the celebration ended, I walked home alone. Not because no one offered to drive me, but because I wanted to walk, to feel. The sidewalk under my shoes, to notice the way the breeze lifted the cherry blossoms and sent them spiraling like confetti. Each step felt grounded, chosen. At home, I made a cup of tea, sat in my favorite chair by the window, and opened my journal. I didn't need to write about regrets or lessons anymore. Today wasn't about what had been lost. Today was about what had lasted. The love I'd reclaimed, the family I'd reshaped, the women I'd helped find their way back to themselves. I flipped to a blank page and began to write. Not an ending, but a kind of offering. A list of dreams still waiting, of lives I'd yet to meet, of kindnesses I hoped would ripple long after I was gone. And when I finished, I stood, taller, lighter. I looked out the window at the life I had grown with my own hands and heart, and knew with steady, unwavering certainty, I didn't just leave a legacy. I became one,